Do you ever look at your competitors and feel like you're saying the exact same thing? You're making the same promises and essentially you have the same clients? There's this frustrating sense that you have that no matter how hard you work your business, you are just going to be just another option in the sea of sameness. Well, here's a startling reality. About 81% of consumers say that they can't find any meaningful difference between most brands within the same industry. And in a world where attention spans is one of the most scarce resources, being forgettable is essentially a business death sentence. But I want you to think about this. What if the problem isn't necessarily your marketing strategy or your offer? The real issue is that you haven't found your unique position. So today we're going to be diving into the transformative power that you can have with knowing where you stand out in the market. When you can identify where you stand out in a sea of, I think as business owners, essentially, we're just trying to stand out amongst everyone else. And when you get really clear on that, everything changes. And so I always start with this point in finding who you are. And we talked about this in prior episodes that, your messaging will resonate on such a deeper level and your ideal clients can start to recognize themselves within your content. And this is so important because that is the number one thing that as you're building a business, you want to differentiate yourself. The fact that 81% of people cannot clearly distinctly identify what the deeper meaning is or the deeper differences between other business ends up being a really bad thing if somebody can't look at your business and say, this is 100% why you're different. And instead of trying to blend in with everyone else, because I feel like as business owners, we end up trying to mimic a lot of what other successful businesses are doing. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's a great starting point, but you have to take that deeper. And you end up, as you're exploring all of these things, you end up becoming more of the obvious choice for people. And the obvious choice essentially for the people that you're meant to serve. And this is one of the most important things because you could have this amazing, incredible business and offer, but if people don't really know what you have, it's going to fall flat and it's not going to resonate. So I love to think about Esther in the Bible. She wasn't just sent to this, random ancient Persian court, right? She was placed in a very specific palace. And it was all done strategically, right? She was strategically positioned for this very specific purpose that only she could fulfill. And the same holds true for you and your business. The question isn't necessarily how do I compete, but rather what position was I uniquely designed for? And yes, a lot of marketing starts with identifying your competitors. And I do that a lot with the frameworks that I teach, but you have to take it another step deeper. If you just remain at that surface level, it's never going to have the right impact and you're not going to deeply serve your clients in the way that you were meant to. And in today's crowded marketplace, most businesses end up blending in with other businesses and they position themselves with this generic essentially like these generic promises instead of leaning into really what they were designed to do. They were given distinctive strengths and a purpose that was only meant for them. So I want today to be about exploring these powerful truths about positioning and how it can really differentiate your business and transform the approach that you take. So the first thing that I want to look at is redemption over competition. So God created you for a very specific purpose at a very specific time. And he took all of these things and molded you and used them to now create the business that you're stepping into. Whether you stay in it long term or it's something that you pivot into, that all creates this very unique approach that only you have. And most positioning advice ends up telling you to look at these marketing gaps and competitor weaknesses. And those are all valid. I'm not going to dismiss any of those, but the most authentic positioning ends up starting with a very different question. And that question ends up being, I'm trying to think of how to word this. It's what transformation Have you personally experienced that you are now very equipped to facilitate for others? And I want you to think about the woman at the well. I can't remember her name. I always remember her as just the woman at the well. And after her life-changing encounter with Jesus, like if you're not familiar with the story, she had, multiple husbands, and she had to go to the well at a very specific time, which was not the most ideal time, as other women went to the well. And Jesus was not even like, his mission and his disciples were headed for another town, but he knew that he had to stop there. And he knew that she was going to be there at this very specific time. And he spoke to her. And what ended up happening with his encounter with her is it changed everything for her. Obviously, as it would, just speaking to Jesus alone. But with her, he used her pain and her shame and all the things that she was struggling with, and it became a very powerful message. And I love to use her as an example because she had this life-changing encounter. Like, just the instant that she spoke with Jesus, everything transformed, and she didn't just become this general messenger of spreading the word about Jesus. Because if I'm remembering correctly, what during this time, Jesus hadn't made a lot of his ministry very public and saying that he was the Messiah. And her going out and spreading the miracle that he had done in her life was a big deal. And she was the one that, people would have thought of as poorly. She was somebody who had a past, and he used her specifically because she had a very, very powerful message that he wanted her to send out. And to the people that knew her story, her past became her platform for impact. And I love that. It's so strategic, and obviously it's with intention, right? God does everything with intention and purpose. And I want you to take a moment right now and look at your story and ask yourself, what transformation have I experienced in my life and my business that would be transformative for my journey? What struggle to success story do I have? And I think a lot of people look at that and think, well, this doesn't really blend in with this, or, maybe I haven't struggled as much as what others have. Whatever the case may be, you have some struggle to success story that uniquely qualifies you to guide others. And that transformative story that you have is the foundation for this powerful position that you possess that honestly nobody can ever replicate. The second truth is that position that you have is revealed within your consistent fruit. And what I mean by that is it's the things that you're doing on a daily basis and not this sporadic success that you've had within your business. We've all had those moments, I feel like, in business where we try something new and we see this surprising success. And that's amazing, but authentic positioning isn't about the occasional wins. It's revealed in these patterns that we have as business owners that are patterns of impact that consistently flow within our day-to-day work. The things that we're doing on a regular basis that are, causing each of us to have this very unique perspective that we were designed to carry, this very intentional weight. Like, it's not someone else's assignment, it's ours alone. And the unique gifts and perspectives that we all carry create these natural platforms of success that I think that we don't even realize that we're operating in, that are most often what are in alignment with the purpose that God created us for. So I want you to pay attention to these very consistent patterns that you're seeing in your business. And they don't happen for, they're not meaningless. They happen for a reason. And not every single thing that happens in your business is, something that should be analyzed with a microscope and, but there are moments and patterns that end up popping up that you notice, that other people notice, that you should take account of. And I want you to look at that and say, well, where do I see this going? Where does this create a lasting impact for me? And what type of transformation happens naturally when I do these things and I serve others with the gifts that I have authentically? And I feel like what ends up happening is that we have this deep feeling or this sense of, yes, that's exactly what I was made for. And those are the moments that you should be paying attention to. And they're not coincidences, right? They are what makes you very uniquely positioned. And those are the things that are indicators for you and your business that you should be paying attention to. The third truth in all of this is essentially that what I believe is probably your most powerful position. It addresses both your practical and your purpose-driven need. And this is where I feel like most businesses end up missing within their distinctive positioning. And it's because they're either focusing entirely too much on practical solutions, which is great, but if you're doing that without a deeper meaning, or they end up emphasizing purpose without this practical experience. I don't know. I feel like your most powerful position ends up being in the space where it intersects with both, what you were given as your past experiences and, the talents and unique perspectives that you have as an individual, and taking your practical experience, and they're not different. They intersect and they create this powerful position that I think most often we feel like it has to be one or the other. And when you can end up solving some sort of practical problem for your audience and addressing a deeper purpose, if you know anything about what I speak on, I am so big on going deeper and finding the root and the things that people struggle with that they don't talk about, the things that people aren't showcasing or highlighting in their social media highlight reels, like the real things that they're sharing to their friends, or maybe they're not even sharing it to their friends and family. It's the things that keep them up at night. And when you create this very specific value, because it comes from your own perspective, and it isn't just this generic competitor rhetoric, it's one that simply cannot end up being replicated, right? Like it's no matter how someone may approach it, even if it's so similar to you, it can never be replicated because you're coming from this place of past experience, past knowledge, current skills and talents, and something that it's your own unique blueprint that God created within inside of you. And if you want to make it practical, essentially what it is you're discovering how to step into your own unique position. And I want you to start taking this inventory, like a real thought-filled inventory of the things that you're strong in. And I like to think of it as like you're almost bragging on yourself. You're filling your mind with positivity about all the things that make you so great at what you do, and the approach that you take that's so different, and the perspective that you have and methodologies that end up making your work so different. Something that isn't generic. It's not a cookie cutter. It's not a, generic term like leadership or communication, but it's a very specific expression of the gifts that make your approach so different. And when you listen deeply to the specific struggles that people are facing, of the people that you're consistently attracting, you'll find that they have these tensions that you end up having to navigate between, or certain language that you end up kind of speaking when you're trying to describe the approach that you take to their challenges, or, you're able to find this deeper yearning into the exact struggle that they're facing beyond just like a practical need. It's not surface level. I mean, if you know anything about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like I teach on that or reference that a lot in my teachings, and it's because everybody has something a need that they're wanting met. But if you go deeper than that, it goes beyond just a surface level yearning of, I want to fit in, or I want to make more money. You just have to know when to listen. And when you can identify those things, that's where the transformation actually happens. And when you're able to identify like this intersection between, these very specific strengths that you have and the ability to address those needs in a way that really gives them what they need, a huge shift ends up happening with your connection with them, and you end up converting more and you align with your ideal people a lot quicker. So I know that a lot of you might be thinking, well, if I get this very specific, or I get super hyper specific within my positioning, won't it exclude any potential clients that I might have? And I want you to consider this powerful illustration. So there was this woman with an alabaster jar of this very expensive perfume, right? And she had a choice. She could have used this in a million different ways, and she was trying to benefit as many people with that one small jar of what she had, but instead she poured in just what was needed in a very specific way. And her focus wasn't criticized, it was honored. And it was something that people viewed as this beautiful thing because she was very intentional about what she did. So instead of trying to serve many, she tried to serve them with the best quality in the way that they specifically needed to very specific people. So she did it in small amounts instead of trying to serve everyone. And your specific positioning isn't a limitation. It's a pathway, a very clear pathway to your beautiful and impactful work. And the paradox between all of that is it's not that the clarity within your impact is limiting you. In fact, it doesn't limit your reach, it amplifies it. And it's done in a way that when you can speak so clearly to the needs of the people that could benefit from what you have most, it does it in a way that just naturally creates that multiplication. And you end up kind of subtracting out the people that weren't meant for it. So instead of trying to filter in all of the people and getting all of these numbers and having it be a numbers game, and essentially it being the same end result, you're saving time and energy by only focusing on the people that need to hear and benefit from what you have to offer. And so when you try to position yourself for everyone, the message ends up getting diluted. And when you position yourself according to your very unique design, your message becomes more concentrated, and the concentration of those messages ends up creating a more powerful transformation. Another example is C.S. Lewis, right? He could have positioned himself as this general writer and he was addressing all of these audiences, but instead what he did is he found a very unique position within everything, and it translated into this very deep truth, into, creating imaginative stories that really had clear reasoning, and it resonated with his audience so much more, and he impacted so many more people. And if you end up embracing your very specific positioning, what ends up happening is you're not trying to do or be all the things to all the people. With C.S. Lewis, his impact ended up going further than just this generic approach that he could have had. His children's fairy tale novels ended up being something that reached millions. And these people were potentially people who would have never ended up picking up his work. And so the clarity that he had within his positioning didn't limit his influence. In fact, it magnified it. There is a lot of limiting beliefs that people have in relation to this. And I think what ends up happening is that those limiting beliefs end up doing just that. They limit you from really reaching the people that you were designed to to impact. And I think a lot of that is what we feed into ourselves, is that, I'm not unique, I'm not different, I don't have anything special or different than anybody else to offer. And automatically, just simply by being you, that is the differentiator. And knowing what that is powerful for you and your business. And you have to know that very early on. And most businesses go very surface level. They don't go very deep into this area. And I explore that so often and very early on in my framework with Lean an Empire. I want you to know that you don't need to stand out just by competing with everybody else. You simply need to stand out by being firm in the position that you were uniquely created to fulfill. And I think when you can realize this and understand the impact that you have on others, it can change everything for you and your business.